Awesome. I love learning about Shell. I've been using it, expanding it, and it's great to see where it's going. And awesome questions. Keep the questions coming in with hashtag .NETConf. Of course, for your chance, if you get picked, we'll send you a Xamarin Monkey, which is awesome. Now, I am ridiculously excited yet again for one of my best friends in the entire world. Barty is coming in. I have his apps on my phone right now. I use them every single day. They're award-winning, amazing, and he's going to tell you all about how he made them and how you can do it too.
Hey everybody, I'm Barty Goldriz, and today I'll be talking to you about building and marketing award-winning Xamarin apps. So, I know every app developer's journey is different, and so I thought it'd be nice if I start this talk by sharing with you my story, one that eventually and unexpectedly led to building 2 award-winning apps. I'll then talk about the apps in a bit more detail, and then I'll finish the talk by going through 10 lessons I learned on this journey that will hopefully help you on yours. I should caveat this by stating this is not going to be a technical walkthrough, and so apologies in advance if that's what you're looking forward to. But I mean, I expect the other amazing talks today to have satisfied that need. So the journey. Back in 2012, I was a passionate Windows Phone user, so much so I decided to learn to develop for it. AppyWeather, one of the apps I'll be talking to you today, launched on 2014 on Windows Phone. Its development took a while, mainly because I was learning as we go. I had a full-time job, and probably most influentially, I sweat over the details, which can be generally a good thing, but not always. A couple of years later, rest in peace Windows Phone, I launched AppyText, a lightweight text editor on Windows 10. Although both apps were what I consider to have been successful side projects, neither of them generated enough revenue to act as my primary source of income. That said, I know there were plenty of developers at the time, and there were plenty of developers at the time who managed to make successful careers out of having apps on Windows, but unfortunately that didn't apply to me. So what followed was a lot of reflection, and probably after years of denial, I came to the realization that I need to be where the users are, i.e. iOS and Android. So Q 2018, when I started looking into Xamarin more, I had heard a lot about it, but I never had done a deep dive into it, mainly because I had the full-time job and I was probably too invested in the technologies that my existing apps were built in. But I was sold. So much so that I made a big life decision, which was to quit my full-time job to become a full-time independent developer. I was confident by what I had learned that Xamarin would be able to get me to where the users are within a reasonable time frame. But it's important for me to note that I had a financial runway to work with, primarily thanks to my wife, that gave me the opportunity to make such a move. 6 months later, AppyWeather finally launched on Android. A few weeks after that, Rough, the second of the apps I'll be talking to you about today, launched on Android as well. A few months later, Rough had a release on Windows 10, something which would have not been possible if it wasn't for Xamarin. So that's 2 apps, one of them on 2 platforms in less than a year by a single developer. Thank you, Xamarin. And earlier this year, I began iOS development work on AppyWeather. What primarily convinced me to go with Xamarin was a combination of Visual Studio and C#. I'm comfortable in Visual Studio and I love C#. When I restarted work on AppyWeather as a full-time indie, the original plan was to launch on Android first and see how it goes. Because of this, as well as my desire to have access to the same toolkit as a native Android developer, I went with Xamarin Android. So let's talk about the apps in more detail now. AppyWeather, I like to think of AppyWeather as the most personal weather app because it's been designed by someone who checks the weather every day. I live in London, and so checking the weather is one of the first things I do every day, regardless of the season. What makes AppyWeather unique is how it summarizes the weather in user-friendly language. AppyWeather ended the year on Google Play's 2019 Best of list in Everyday Essentials, and it was one of Fast Company's 25 best new apps of 2019. As I hinted at the start, even though I knew I had created apps of a certain quality, the recognition that followed was beyond my wildest dreams. It's the dead simple weather app you've always wanted. That's what Jared Newman of Fast Company had to say about AppyWeather. Rough, on the other hand, is designed to be the springboard for all your writing on the go. Drafts, notes, lists, thoughts, you name it. It doesn't want or need to replace your text editor or to-do list. It can complement them, or it can work on its own. Whatever works. It's a pleasure to write in Rough, and it's effortless to move the writing out. Something that still hasn't sunk in is the fact that Rough won a Google 2019 Material Design Award. It also ended the year on Google Play's Best of 29 list in Hidden Gems. Prioritizing function and clarity, Rough's consistent use of typography, shape, and color create an inviting themed experience. That's what Google Design had to say about Rough. Next, I'll be sharing with you 10 lessons I've learned since becoming an indie that will hopefully help you on your journey towards recognition. Lesson number 1, not another app. It's not 2008 anymore when App Store launched. There are millions of apps on Android and iOS, and plenty in whatever category you're looking at, even if it's a niche app. This isn't the time to create just another weather app or just another text editor. There's enough of those available already. And you know what? They've got a 10+ year head start on you. So good luck competing with that. The good news is you know what's out there already. You know what their strengths are. You know what their weaknesses are. The established players are set in their ways. They don't want to alienate their user base with changes. And this is the type of legacy baggage that you're not carrying by being late to the party. Use your late entry to your advantage. Be bold or don't bother. When I originally started work on AppyWeather many years ago on Windows Phone, the early designs were very similar to every other weather app that was out there. And if I wasn't designing for myself, there's a good chance that I would have just released just another weather app. And this is really important. If the problem that you're attempting to solve is your own problem, then that's what I like to call home court advantage. You have a deep understanding of the requirements, and you'll be the first to recognize a design that works. Don't start the app on the back of an idea. Focus on a problem instead. The problem AppyWeather meant to solve was not to present the weather, but to save me the trouble and summarize it for me instead. I didn't enjoy writing on my phone, so I built Rough and made sure it made it easy to move text to the next and final target. Both apps entered really crowded markets, but managed to stand out in the crowd because they offered a fresh spin on an existing problem. Lesson number 2, don't write a pop tune. Because if you try to please everyone, you're more likely to deliver a forgettable experience. With both apps, people seem to have a love-hate relationship with them, and I actually take great pride in that. I know their unconventional designs aren't for everyone, but when there are millions of potential users out there, I was happy to be a niche player. Lesson number 3, and this is one of my favorites, version 3.0. The MVP, so that's the minimal viable product. Ship it. That seems to be the popular opinion. I mostly disagree, but let me explain why. You're up against apps with years and years of iteration, i.e. they're rich in features and polish. When it comes to the overall user experience, you don't want to ship anything that is rough around the edges. You want to release an app that feels like a 3.0. But it's a bit trickier with functionality because that's going to be difficult unless you're prepared to spend many months or maybe even years to catch up. But here's the secret. It's better if you don't. Do less, but what you do do it better than the rest. Because if you try to do everything, you're going to be directly judged versus all the other apps out there who offer the same and more. And so you're going to be penalized for anything that you've missed. But if you do that one thing and you do it really well, people are more likely to stay away from these unfair comparisons and much more likely to judge you based on what you do and not what you're missing. So with Rough, for example, it's just a single sheet of text. File management is out the window. But because of the intentionally narrow scope of its feature set, it was important the app made up for this in terms of personality. So I paid extra attention to its branding, and I was actually rewarded for it in terms of the Google Design Award that it got later on. Lesson number 4, problem comes first, execution comes second, and then testing. Lots and lots of testing. It may come as a surprise, but you're your most valuable tester. You shouldn't just be testing the app, you need to be living with it, to the point that no feedback from anyone should come as a total surprise to you. You should already know what works, what doesn't, what could be better, what could be much better. But there's a role for the other testers as well. You will need their help. And what you need to be doing is you got to be monitoring for recurring themes in people's feedback, and you got to prioritize accordingly. If something keeps coming up, it probably needs your attention. As far as the question of when do you begin testing, it depends on what you're after. If it's deep feedback, then as early as possible. But if it's more shallow feedback that you're after, i.e., you want to just test for functionality rather than its user experience, then you can afford to bring in testers later. To help you decide, remember, the earlier the testers are on board, the more likely it is that you can act on their feedback. When you leave it late, you're not as agile. You're carrying a lot of weight. And you know what's going to hurt? It's when you get a piece of feedback and you want to act on it, but it's going to hurt because it's going to result in delays and rewrites, things that could have been avoidable had you brought in the testers earlier. Lesson number 5, back from the future. AppyWeather has a lot of strings, and they're not conventional text-only strings. They have a number of different position dynamic variables. It's complicated, trust me. When I originally launched AppyWeather on Windows Phone many years ago, it wasn't long before I started receiving requests from users from all around the world asking for the app to be available in their local language. Problem was, I couldn't because the backend wasn't flexible enough. I didn't design it with localization in mind. And given how tech-centric AppyWeather was, and still is, I lost a lot of potential users because of this limitation. And so, as far as AppyWeather on Android was concerned, one of the core requirements was for me to be able to support localization. This added dev time, but I felt it was justified. Today, I'm proud to say AppyWeather is available in 8 different languages, and approximately 40% of its revenue is from non-English speaking markets. Pro tip, a German above any other language, at least on Android, based on my experience with AppyWeather and Rough, is the one that you should be focusing on translating first. Think carefully about monetization before you launch. So as far as AppyWeather and Rough are concerned, they both have 2 different models. For AppyWeather to be sustainable, it became clear a recurring revenue stream is essential because getting the weather costs money. If I made it a one-time purchase, even if it was at a premium, say $5, which is a lot for an app these days, yes, there would have been more sales up front, but I eventually would have ended up making a loss on that user. Short-term gain, long-term pain. Always plan to be sustainable. In the spirit of being a side project, I thought I'd experiment with Ruff's monetization model. At launch, it was an old school paid upfront app for 99 cents. It did really bad. But I mean, if I was an established developer, it probably would have done better. But being an unknown, it just didn't work out. So I went freemium and almost immediately saw much, much better results. An important thing to keep in mind is if you've acquired a reasonable number of users, making changes to your monetization model may get complicated. So just try to, it's going to be tough to get it spot on before launch, but pay attention to it. Think about it carefully. Another important thing to keep in mind that's easy to forget is if you prioritize for volume, you're going to end up spending much less time on the product and way more time doing customer support. If that's okay with you, fine, but just keep that in mind. As far as I'm concerned, volume shouldn't be your biggest concern at launch, especially because you want to keep it on the down low. So, okay, imagine the scenario. You've been working on the app for months. It's ready to finally go out to the public. You can't wait. I've been there. You've been there. It's a great feeling. Conventional wisdom and great planning says you got to reach out in advance to all the influencers in the space to get a day one press boost. Makes sense, right? Maybe. Remember, you can only make a first impression once. So you can do that, and it definitely has its benefits, or you wait. No matter how well private testing went, there's no substitutes for having your apps out in the wild. What I'd personally advise is go with a soft launch. Put it out there, but don't broadcast to the world about it. Monitor the crash logs. Look out for unexpected behavior and feedback. This is especially relevant if you're developing for Android. Given its ecosystem's fragmented nature, I can guarantee there will be unaccounted issues on devices you haven't tested on, and possibly specific versions of Android even. I'll give you two quick examples. AppyWeather had a lot of text display issues on phones with certain DPIs. Ruff, on the other hand, had a blank setting screen on Android 7 and below due to hitting a newer API endpoint. So I didn't follow this advice, and I wish I had. But the thing is, both apps generally got great positive press at launch. But if I think back to the version that the press was on, it gives me the shivers almost. If I had waited, I'm pretty confident the uninstall rate would have been lower and sales higher. So the question that you need to ask yourself is, do you want to prioritize having 100 downloads today or potentially 100 customers tomorrow? Timing this isn't an exact science. Trust that there will come a moment when you just know that the app is ready from a performance, feature set, and overall polished point of view. And to get there, you have to iterate for life. And this has two meanings. If you don't iterate, you're not going to survive. And spoilers, you never stop iterating. The priority shouldn't be to add, but to refine. Don't be tempted by the numbers game. Don't fall into that trap. When I approach any potential feature work, what I ask myself is, will this add value to the experience? If yes, I prioritize it. And my tips are to prioritize the ones that will add the most value and take the least time to accomplish, followed by the ones that take more time and still add value. Also, another thing to do is to identify the pain points within the experience and make addressing those a priority too, ideally during your soft launch. Performance and stability tend to be overlooked when you're evaluating value. But I mean, that's a mistake, because don't think because the product of your work is invisible that it won't be felt. Remember, you want the app to feel like a 3.0. And a pro tip, this is something that helped me a lot, was using the profiler to identify friction points within the experience. Lesson number 8, engage. The app is out there. What you should be doing is you got to respond to every review and email, because here's a secret: all users appreciate being acknowledged. This will lead to sales, this will lead to customer loyalty, and this will lead to 5-star reviews. I've lost count of the number of 1-star reviews that I managed to turn around to 5-star reviews simply on the back of providing excellent and personal customer support. And this is important for people depending on subscriptions. It's essential you provide 5-star customer service. You can't afford to do otherwise. And for indies out there, if you are an indie, leverage this. Wear this badge with pride, because you know what? People try to go out of their way to support independence. They find it refreshing when they reach out to the developer. They're expecting to hear back from a team of developers, and then this one person comes back to them. It's refreshing for them to hear from an actual person rather than a massive company, and a person who treats them not like a customer, but like family. Lesson number 9, dev are better things to do. If you want your app to succeed, you can't just be a developer. My natural instinct, identifying first and foremost as a developer, is to constantly improve the app. Add this feature, add that feature. My rationale is, if I keep improving the app, then the users will follow. And it's not that this isn't correct, but there's another way. There's a faster way to get to more users. And the reason why I say this is because you're going to reach a point within the app's lifecycle that you're going to experience diminishing returns to your development efforts from a customer acquisition perspective. By that, I mean, once the app demonstrates enough value, it doesn't need to be any better to convince users of its current and potential value. A more effective way to grow is to find users. Dedicate time in your schedule for marketing and growth. Reach out to tech sites, bloggers, YouTubers, all the influencers. Routinely engage with them. And if your app is available in other languages, reach out to the above big players in those languages. App Store optimization should be a priority. I'll give you a quick example. I had reasonable notice that Rough will be announced as a material design winner on a specific date. One of my big regrets in this last year was I didn't prioritize improving its clearly not good enough screenshots for the announcement drop. What I did, being a developer, is I worked on a bunch of features. I focused on core development work instead. I then optimized to make the most out of the heavy traffic that came in post-announcement, and I really wish I had. Experiment especially with monetization. Increase it, decrease it, in all markets, in some markets. See what works. Find the sweet spot for you and your users. You need to start to get into the mindset that these kinds of tasks are just as important as core development work, especially once the app reaches certain maturity. The best piece of advice I've been given in my indie app journey is really simple, and it's the final lesson. Keep going. If you keep at it, it's only a matter of time before you start to get recognition. Happy Weather today now has more than 100,000 downloads. Rough has more than 50,000 downloads. It may be surprising and reassuring that this was almost all organic growth. Quick story about Rough. I originally started working on it from a business and creative need to complement Happy Weather. There are many moments throughout its life cycle, both before and after its release, that it just made sense for me to abandon it. I thought it, others will tell me it, and the numbers would support it, but I just couldn't. I just felt I had something here that was worth persevering with. And I'm glad I didn't give up, because otherwise Rough would not have won a 2019 Material Design Award, and things would not have snowballed since. So I know I haven't touched on Xamarin in any of the 10 lessons shared, and there's good reason for that. because the best compliment I can send Xamarin's way is the fact that it got out of my way throughout this entire experience. Never once did I feel like a second-class Android developer, or more recently on iOS. You know how in sports, you know how to tell if a referee slash umpire is great at what they do? It's when you don't notice them. That's how I describe Xamarin. It's been this immensely dependable, invisible presence throughout this last year. Being an indie, time really is money. The cross-platform APIs provided by Xamarin Essentials have saved me a ton of time. Geolocation, permissions, settings. Without these, I'd have spent way more time doing busy work and way less time adding core value to the experience. What's great about Xamarin is how the most popular third-party libraries for Android and iOS have Xamarin bindings available. And if they're not, and you're smarter than I am, the tools are available for you to do it yourself. A few I'm especially grateful for are the Sliding Up panel by Martin van Dijk, Fab by Fabio Nuno. Both of these I use in rough. Last but not least, James Montemagno's in-app billing plugin. I have no idea what I would have done without this one. Appy Weather wouldn't look as nice as it does if it wasn't for Syncfusion Xamarin UI chart control. They've got a bunch of others worth checking out as well. Another thing that's great about being a Xamarin developer is how the Xamarin team actively provides what I like to call freebies for developers. Startup tracing and custom profilers are two that come to mind that significantly improve startup times. They took me less than 5 minutes to implement each, and trust me, these are the sorts of optimizations that are important to users. And as I mentioned at the start, I've recently started work on the iOS version of Appy Weather using Xamarin iOS, and I'm delighted by how I can focus basically my entire efforts on the user experience and not need to worry about rewriting any logic. And there's a lot of logic, let me tell you. This is going to save me a ton of critical time. Finally, according to Google Design, Material Design Awards is about recognizing best-in-class designs from around the community. Let Rough winning a Material Design Award leave no doubt that Xamarin is capable of delivering best-in-class designs on Android and elsewhere. Thank you again to Xamarin for enabling this journey. And you can find me on Twitter at MetroStyle, MTRO Style. Happy to answer any of your questions now or on Twitter later. Thanks, everyone.
Barty, thank you so much. It was absolutely amazing over here. We were just both sitting here watching in awe, loving it. Felt just like a TED Talk. I love it. And in fact, lots of great comments, people loving your story and also how to enable these great award-winning app designs and just kind of the guidance that you're giving. A few questions. We got time for two really quick.
Cool.
First is from Samir on Twitter. It says, one, great to hear from you, Barty. He did have a question. He just also said downloaded both of your apps. So boom, awesome. I also just upgraded Rough to Rough Plus. First question from Samir is, you chose to just go straight to Android first. What were your thoughts on why you didn't decide to go to iOS as well, using either like MVVM Cross or Xamarin Forms or some other cross-platform framework?
I mean, it's a really simple answer. I had an Android phone, and it just made sense for me to design for the phone that I'm comfortable with. I didn't have a Mac at the time as well, so it made it a bit tricky to develop for iOS. But I mean, that's basically it's not a good reason. It was a convenience factor, really, at the time.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I mean, whatever you have is what you start developing for, right? So
Exactly.
I love it. That's how I started. I was the same way. Good question from Starlin came in. This is actually directly to, you may have hit on it, maybe you can go a little bit more in detail. He said, for Appy Weather or even Rough, how did you actually start promoting the application to the media? Like, how did you go about that?
So basically, I was kind of aware because I followed the news and everything. So I know who all the big writers and the tech sites are. So I put the list together of all these different people and publications, and I put together like an email template with a press kit, and I would just send out emails. Basically as simple as that. I would just be sending out emails to them, giving them the opportunity to get a promo code if they want, and just sharing with them my story. Going back to my whole point about leveraging the fact that you're indie, so I'm making sure that they're aware of, let's say, my background, and trying to use that almost to my advantage. And it was just constantly just reaching out to different people, really.
Awesome. Barty, thank you so much for the amazing session. I can't wait to go rewatch it again and learn even more and go deep and take it to all my applications in the store. Congratulations again. And
thanks a lot, James.
Have a good night. Cheers.
You too. Thanks.
Awesome. We're going to head back over to Olia for the next session.
Great. Thank you very much. We just heard a talk by Barty Go.